Our statement for being here today is because of our ancestors and because we as a people are in a unique position to be able to demand now what is ours. The only way we can do it, though, is to start somewhere. Not all of us are going to be able to step up. It's just like running a race. Not everybody can run a race and win as champions if you're not equipped and not prepared. But if you have knowledge and you have information and you are geared and prone and ready for the race, it's amazing what you can accomplish. But if you're not, you're going to fall out the first leg of the journey. And so many of us are not optimistic about reparations. Many of us have talked about it, and many of us think, oh, it's panacea and not possible. But because I've worked on reparations with the Japanese and others, I know it is possible. But you got to have faith and determination and be resilient. You must be resilient. And we don't have the kind of leadership that will help polarize us into that. I look around the room and I see so many people of great confidence and tenacious spirit. Bruce, who I've watched, like he said, how many hats does he wear? And he wears them well, not just half wear them. He wears them well. In each position that he holds, he makes an impact, and it makes all the difference. And if we would listen to him, it would be amazing how different our community would be. The same with Royce, the same with Ben Holyfield, the same with Mr. Pitts. There are countless amazing individuals in this room that if they have the opportunity to be who they could be and be listened to, our community would be different. But now we have this opportunity. And this opportunity is to demand reparations, know what we're worth, know what we're valued at, and know that if we don't do it, who's going to do it? If LA County can spend $1.3 billion on illegals over a year and a half for services, then why are we scrapping and worrying about pennies for us? $1.3 billion. How can that be when you've got the descendants of slaves that built this country, that you don't feel you owe anything? You don't owe anything. And if it wasn't for us, where would America be? We built the greatest nation in the world. But we've got to know this. We can no longer afford for other people to dictate our destiny. We must be willing to dictate it for ourselves. And we can. So it is my pleasure to introduce you to our presenters today. I know I have worn them out with my rhetoric on reparations. And please come and talk to us about generational wealth and about the struggle and about how important it is for us to have and receive reparations. So these are my presenters, Chris and Tristan Bush of General Wealth from Wealth After Work, LLC.
So much for coming. You know how usually we are in the rain. So I know the extra effort it took to be here, and we hope that it definitely is worth your while. Our goal, of course, we met Ms. Moore through a mutual friend, and we started having these conversations just about money. And so what we really want to do, Chris and I are no historians. What we do for a living is we're financial consultants, financial advisors. We put together financial game plans for individual clients, for businesses, for nonprofits, for churches. So what our expertise is in the time value of money and knowing if you know where to put your money, how it could create wealth for you and transcend throughout generations. So our goal, of course, is just to start the conversation, to give you, some numbers. Hopefully, we have to joke, it might be like a Slurpee headache. Sometimes you can't really fathom what we're worth. But I will say, just so you know, in case you didn't, that the descendants of slaves, African Americans in America, we are worth more than America itself. When you talk about what we've done for this nation, you know, some people will conclude that there is no dollar amount that can make up for the centuries that black people were kidnapped, enslaved, and forced to work without pay. But today we're going to try. Okay? So I want to, based in Los Angeles, California. Both of us are proud historically black college university graduates. I went to Southern University in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Chris went to Tuskegee in Alabama. He'll tell you about that. But this, I can't tell you how excited I am to be presenting to you today, because my grandmother, God rest her soul, her name was Patricia Means, and she had a small magazine in LA called Turning Point, and she used to have these summits called the African American Business Summit every year. So she taught us, her children and grandchildren, the value of not only who we are, where we come from, but also what we can do when we stand together. She also worked with Dime Lead, you know, so I have a lot of passion about this subject. So I get excited to talk about it, but I have a bachelor's degree in business, I have a master's degree in adult education. Right now, we have federal and state financial licenses, Series 6, 63, 26. They just mean that you can talk about money, help people with their money, and not go to jail. You know, that's all that means. So what we're gonna do is, it's hard, of course, to go through the years, but what I want to do is just give you some snapshots, and we're going to be throwing out a lot of numbers here, because my goal is that you understand the magnitude of what we're worth, what we're owed, so the little that we're asking for really isn't that much. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit. I'm going to give you, you know, just our value where we're at, and then I'm going to bring Chris up, and he's going to talk to you, because of course this morning I've had the conversation about, okay, well, most people are going to say, well, if you give us reparations, then what? What are you going to do with the money? You know, there's a study that shows that, you know, the top 2% of America own more wealth than the top 98%. And if you started right now and gave everybody the same amount of money, because of how the mindset and the education that the top 2% harbor and own, 98% of the money would still end up back in the hands of the top 2%. So it's very important to not only just discuss, of course, what we're owed, and, you know, not just to talk about the past, but talk about what our future can look like if we're financially educated, if we have a plan. So that's what Chris is going to talk about in the ways of that, okay? So let's get started, shall we? All right, so let's talk about the wealth gap. The headlines tell the story. The truth of the matter is, we need reparations now more than we've ever needed them before, okay? Our African American wealth is in a desperate position. Even within the last 35 years, the African American wealth gap per household income has decreased more than half. So our income has decreased more than half from 1983 to 2016. However, our white counterparts, their household income has risen by a third. New York Times states that for every $100 of white family wealth, black families only hold $5.04. Okay. We've also, the Economic Policy Institute found that 1 in 4 black households have 0 or negative net worth, compared to less than 1 in 10 white families today. In fact, today, it's 2020, which is in a couple of days, black households are projected to lose even more wealth. So not only have we lost wealth, but we're projected to continue to lose wealth if we keep going on the same path. And after the declines, the median white household will own 86 times more wealth than our black counterparts. Forbes, unfortunately, states in a lot of different articles that by 2053, the black household in America will have a median wealth of 0. So, would you agree that this is a topic that should be a priority? Yes. Because unfortunately, even with the wins that we've had in America, when it comes to our money, we are still steady declining, okay? So in terms of the wealth gap, and this is, you know, again, we're not a historian, but let's just talk about it, okay? How did we get here? Of course, the first way we got here was slavery. Estimated 3.94 million slaves over 246 years of free labor. After slavery came the Jim Crow laws, right, which incorporated segregation. But even in the interim of that, there are U.S. government policies like the Homestead Act, okay, go on back now. Okay. The Social Security Act, and different acts that actually excluded people of color from owning businesses, from the right to vote, the right to higher education, and the right banking and savings. The reason why, and then also what I found was just astonishing that there's something called redlining. So in the 1930s, a part of the New Deal, the Federal Housing Administration created loan programs to help home ownership, but it was only accessible, it was supposed to be accessible to everybody. However, these policies resulted in 98% of home loans going to white families. So what happens is, so when you're talking about generational wealth, you absolutely have to start there, because the leg up that was received in terms of land and home ownership. Well, what happened was, as America was continuing to be built, you have a home, and then businesses move into your neighborhood. When businesses move into your neighborhood, it increases your property value. When your property value increases, it increases the equity that you own, which increases your generational wealth. So you're talking about years and years of just one thing alone, just not being able to own homes in America has cost us, you know, trillions of dollars. You go to the next slide. So let's talk about our value, which I've stated before is immeasurable, okay? We were enslaved for 12 generations. We're now 8 generations outside of slavery. So what we can talk about, like I said, you know, if we talk about the money that we lost from slavery, compounding in interest up until now, that number is greater than what America's worth. So we may not be able to capture that, but what we can capture is the free labor that we did give up. So if you take, it's reported that slave owners in the 16th, 17th, and 18th century made about $20 per week profit per slave. That's in 16th, 17th, 18th century dollars. Okay? So back then, that's about 800 billion. Today's dollars, that's $6.4 trillion. Between the 246 years we were that we were enslaved, the free labor that we gave up to our counterparts, okay? So, the National Legal Policy Center placed reparations, they placed the number at about 15 trillion that we would be owed, and today that would boil down to about every single person, every single descendant of a slave, which should receive a check of $500,000 minimum, okay? How they got to that is determine the minimum amount of reparations, which should be at least almost $60 trillion. Because if you calculate the labor, so if you take a slave that worked 10 hours a day, now the numbers that I'm giving you are minimums and they're averages, okay? Because you know a lot of slaves probably 10 hours a day, that was probably a good day, right? But they made it, they got 8 to 8, they probably was like, oh Lord, thank you Jesus, right? But let's say we calculate 10 hours a day, 365 days a year, and the average lifespan at that time was 70 years, okay? We take that time and we, at a rate of $7.25, which is the national minimum wage in America today, 2% interest compounded inflation gives you about $59.2 trillion. So if you do that and you divide that by the 4 million slave descendants, that's how you reach the 500,000 per slave. You guys with me? Remember I told you it was going to be a lot of numbers? Don't worry, I do all the numbers, he's going to do more, right? So if we talk about, okay, well, what are we owed? What does that mean? You always have to go back to, what if America would just stand by its original promise of 40 acres and a mule? Just the original promise. If we just only talked about that, right? Chris, next slide for me, please. So, of course, most of you guys understand that 40 Acres and the Mule was the first systematic promise attempt to provide forms of reparations for freed slaves. Okay, the total bill proposed a total of $400,000 acres. However, you also may know that Lincoln's successor, the very next president, overruled it. Nobody ever got anything, right? So it was really just an idea. It didn't happen. So if we talk about that in today's dollars, America, over the 48 states that, that count, American states, is about $1.9 billion 1.9 billion acres makes up 48 states in America, okay? So that's about 23 trillion, which is about 12,000 an acre on average that America is worth. You guys following me? Mm-hmm. So you'll have some metropolitan cities where you can get up to $106,000 per acre because they have sky rises, there's land, but then you have acres in America that are only worth about $2,000 because it's really just farmland. So when you take all of that together and you average it, it gives you about $12,000 cash, right, per acre. So now let's talk about how we got to this 500,000 number. Because that means if I got my 40 acres in a mule, if I got my 40 acres and each acre on average is about $12,000, that means that America would owe me $480,000 plus the mule is about $20,000. I don't know how much does a mule cost these days. You never really know, right? The horses, because of the hair we use, it might be valued at a little bit more. I don't know. But we round it out to about 500,000. That's where, of course, we get the 500,000 per each of the 4 million slaves. Well, now it's about to get fun because now we're going to talk about what $500,000 does per generation. So now we've talked about how we've spoken a little bit about how we got here, our value. So what are some ways that we can recover what we've lost? So of course, if we start with reparations. So go to the next slide. Let's talk about generational wealth. So on average, the global economy in America has averaged a 12% rate of return in any 4 to 5 year history, 4 to 5 year period in history. So let's say that money is compounded at a very, very modest, which is under the national average percent of 9%. Are you following me? So if we compounded that over one generation, $500,000 over one generation turns into $7.3 million. Let's talk about over two. If we compounded $7.3 million over 2 generations, now mind you, this is one person. So this is what we're talking about. Each one of us has lost in this room based on free labor for 246 years. And I remember I told you we're 8 generations out of slavery. I'm only giving you an example of 3. The second generation, 108 million. Third generation, so now we're talking about our children's children's children. Yes? Our great-great-grandchildren. The Word of God says, a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Yes? Right. Okay? Yes. So if we're talking about our children's children are worth $1.5 billion. Because that's 3 generations, and that's only stopping there. So I'll leave it up for your imagination of what 8 generations looks like. So like I said, we're worth more than America itself. So over time, because of not only the access to the resources of the education, when it comes to money, we're over 200 generations behind, because you have people like the Vanderbilts and the Rockefellers and the JP Morgans who have been compounding their interest in their money for hundreds and hundreds of years. So the answer is, can we catch up? the question is, can we catch up? Maybe we can't catch up, but we can move forward. So if you go to the next slide, Chris, this just talks about what other apologies have looked like. So I love, it's such a value that Ms. Moore has already worked on reparations, because like she says, I know what can happen. I thought this was very interesting. So let's talk about the Native Americans who got reparations. Well, the Native Americans who got reparations, what I found very, very interesting is most of their money, the government currently holds a $5 billion trust. So most of their money was received in the form of land, which they were able to build and get assistance to build businesses, casinos, right? But one thing that also, when we're talking about building generational wealth, is for the tribes that are a part of their treaty, their children get free higher education. And I know it's so funny how things come full circle, because I think I've mentioned this to Ms. Moore, but I actually did an internship with Dimely back in, Lord, what year was that, Lord? That must have been 2005. And there was an intern, we were the same age, we were both about 18, 19, and she was a Native American. So they get free tuition for state schools, not private institutions like Yale or not those, but the state schools. Mm-hmm. And I remember us having a conversation, and I was telling her, joking, I thought it was funny. You're 19 years old, like, oh, good girl, by the time I get out of college, I'm going to have $80,000 in student loan debt. And she looked at me like, Dad, what is that? Because when their children get out of college, they don't have debt. So what if you talk about that value of a debt-free generation, opposed to where you have descendants of slaves that are going to school, even the historically black colleges, and coming out of school with hundreds, $50,000, $100,000 of debt, and how much that has set us back. Opposed to really, if it's just only our children getting free higher education, how much further we would be. Okay? Let's talk about what Ms. Moore is the expert about the Japanese, right? So when it boils down to it, when he sums it up, the Japanese, it was 82,000 Japanese camp survivors from World War II. So they got about $20,000 if you're talking about cash value, okay? Now what I also thought was really interesting was the Jewish. So the US government's Marshall Act persuaded the Jews in Germany to where the Jews also paid 450 German marks, International Federation of Jewish Community, so that's basically about $7 billion that they were paid. But what's interesting, a part of their agreement is that $1 billion of their agreement went to re-electing Jewish politicians so that they can continue to fight for what they believed in. So I thought it was interesting, the different ways that reparations can be made up, if that makes sense, where you can do it where you want some money to come in the form of education, land, cash, your political parties, but this has all been done. So what we're asking for is not unheard of. We did not invent the wheel. All we're asking for is the same treatment that you're talking about our counterparts have received over years. So if you go to the next slide, now what I want to talk, now actually I'm going to pass it to my husband. So we've talked about, what we're worth.